Okay, here we go at the start of the tour. We're going up Crooms Hill with the Greenwich Theatre coming up on our left. That started off as a music hall and has been there for about 150 years with a brief gap when it was nearly destroyed by a bomb. And quick, over to your right, is the Fan Museum, which is the only museum in Europe that's dedicated to the art of fan making and fans themselves. You should go in and have a look. All of these houses that we're looking at coming up on the right are thought to be Georgian, but some of them aren't. They're older and they've been refaced to look Georgian. Benjamin War lived there, and that's a blue plaque house we've just seen. He was a social reformer and a campaigner who founded the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. Crooms Hill, by the way, comes from the Saxon name meaning crooked. As you can see, we're going up in a crooked fashion. We're going to come across a number of ghosts on this tour, and the first ones are a ghostly procession of red-headed women who apparently have been seen going through the gates from Crooms Hill into Greenwich Park, which is just over here on our left. It's a funeral procession for a boy called Tom, who knocked at one of the houses on Crooms Hill looking for his mother, but Tom had died 2 weeks earlier. Scary. This is Our Lady Star of the Sea, the church coming up on the right, and there's a school for girls just behind it, which is very well thought of in the local area. As we get to the top of the hill, we'll be coming around to see Ranger's House on the left-hand side. As soon as we get to the top junction, look over to your left and you'll see it with some bowling greens in front of it, and I'll talk a little bit more about Ranger's House as we get closer. If you look over to your left through the bowling greens, you'll see, there we are, we can see it through the car window. That's Ranger's House, which is a house dated from the 17th century. It's a red brick residence, initially built for the Rangers of Greenwich Park, not many of whom lived there, and then various royalty have lived there ever since, including Queen Caroline, who was quite a scurrilous character. Her bath is about all that's left of the house next door, but you can see it in Greenwich Park, just to the left of the Ranger's House as you look at it. Since 2002, Ranger's House has had a collection of art in there, the Werner collection, which was put together by Sir Julius Werner, who was richer than Donald Trump. And here we come up onto Blackheath. The name Blackheath is excitingly thought to have come from the fact that there's a rumour that the heath was used as a burial ground during the Black Death. Sadly, this isn't entirely untrue. It would have been much more exciting if it was true, but it's probably called Blackheath for the more mundane reason that that's the colour of the earth, just meaning black, dark soil, the bleak heath. So there are some plague victims under there, maybe, so you can still tell the story, that's fine. Lots has happened on the heath. There's not going to be enough time to go through all of it, but one of the earliest events was the Romans came up here and built their main London to Dover road, Watling Street, that crossed the heath, and we're on it now, the A2, or something like it anyway. Since then, the heath has always been open land. It's been a host for camps and for meetings, big meetings. Wat Tyler, leading the Peasants' Revolt in 1381, rested here with his revolting peasants until they went down the hill to what's now Greenwich Park to meet the king the following morning. The Danes camped here much earlier, before William the Conqueror. So many people have been camped on Blackheath. It's still used as an entertainment spot now, but not so much for camping anymore. We're getting to a little bit of a quieter part of the Royal Borough of Greenwich here, which isn't to say it's boring. Nowhere in the borough is boring, particularly if you live here. I mean, if you lived up in one of these houses on the left, it would be an exciting place to live, would it not? Just one more thing about Blackheath, actually. There are caves underneath Blackheath, which have been there for a long time, since as early as the 5th century. They were used as hiding places and occasionally even as living places in more modern times. In 1780, a builder found an entrance and he built a cottage down there to claim the land. He didn't manage to do so. this is a remarkably named Sun in the Sands roundabout. I've got no idea why this roundabout's called the Sun in the Sands, apart from the fact that there's a pub there called the Sun in the Sands. So why the Sun in the Sands pub is called the Sun in the Sands, and then the Sun in the Sands roundabout is named after the Sun in the Sands pub, I don't know. It's a mystery. There's lots of mysteries in a proper London borough. And so now we're going on our way to Eltham Palace, where you'll be getting out of the van. So talk amongst yourselves for a moment or two, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be back with you in a moment. Lots of people live in the borough of Greenwich, or rather more properly, the Royal Borough of Greenwich. We became royal in 2012, mostly because of the long connection that royalties had with the borough. But it's a really busy and workaday community, as well as being this fantastic place for visitors. Oh, coming up on your left is Hornfair Park. Hornfair is another unusual name, like Sun in the Sands, that comes from a legend that King John attempted to seduce a miller's wife in Charlton. The bastard! The miller found him and went to kill the king, but the king escaped, etc., etc. And he said that he was the king, and if the miller let him go without a bruise and without even flicking him on the nose, he could have all the land from Charlton to the bend of the river at Rotherhithe, which became known as Cuckold's Point. Anyway, ever since then, well, almost ever since then, there's been a Horn Fair, which still goes on today, although it was shut for a while in the 19th century because of general rowdy behaviour. Whether or not this occurs today, I couldn't tell you. Here we are progressing along what is a regular city road, but is actually Shooters Hill. And we're going to get later on to one of the highest points in South London when we visit Sevendrew Castle. Shooters Hill has been around for centuries and was probably named after people that shot things here. Something like that. So in 1661, Samuel Pepys mentions passing under a man that hangs upon Shooters Hill, who was probably a highwayman. The highwaymen were rife around this area, both on Shooters Hill, in Blackheath, in any of these sorts of wooded areas, and it was a lot more wooded, as you can see on the left, in previous years. And highwaymen would burst out of the bushes and take your money and valuables in exchange for your life. So we're coming up on our right to the Royal Herbert Pavilions, which were originally built as a kind of rest home for veterans from the Crimean War in the 1850s. They remained more or less a military hospital until the 1970s, and now they are, in common with many other places in London, have been turned into apartments and places to live. As we wait at these lights, if we do wait at these lights when you do it, we can see across the road that strange bowed window. That's the old Shooters Hill police station, which is, around these parts, as they say, reputed to be haunted. We're on our way nearly there to Eltham Palace now. It's just going to take a few more minutes. So as we're moving along through this wintry landscape, we're going to be passing through Eltham High Street and past the Tudor Barn Restaurant and Wellhall Pleasance. But I'm going to save those to talk to you about when we get there. In the meantime, if you've got any questions about what we've been looking at or what we're going to see, now's the time to ask. As we go up this road towards the centre of Eltham, we're going to pass on our right-hand side Wellhall Pleasance. Pleasance means a small area of trees and green, and it's a word that doesn't get used very often. There's an East Greenwich Pleasance as well. The Pleasance now that you can see is a lovely little place. The Tudor Barn that you can see, restaurant that comes up on our right, is a Tudor barn. It was probably around in Henry VIII's time. And one other point about Wellhall Pleasance is that E. Nesbit lived here. E. Nesbit, who wrote The Railway Children, had a house in Wellhall Pleasance, which is now unfortunately gone. But she may well have made up Jenny Agutt's performance in that wonderful movie while she was living in that house. Surprisingly, or not surprisingly, because in England someone always has, and the UK in fact, there's always somebody well known that comes from a small town. We've got several local residents who are well known here. Boy George was born and grew up in Eltham and was in fact expelled from a local school around here. And Bob Hope, who only those of you over the age of 50 will remember, I suspect, but he was born here, and there's a theatre down the road on our right which is named after him, the Bob Hope Theatre. We're coming up now to the first stop of our tour today, and that's Eltham Palace. Eltham Palace was a Tudor palace. It was built originally in the 1400s, and it was one of the royals' favourite palaces, particularly of Henry VIII, who grew up here, although he was born at Greenwich Palace, which was on the site of the old Royal Naval College in Greenwich. Most of the original palace is gone now, and what's in its place is a fabulous Art Deco house built by the Courtaulds in the 1930s, who were very particular people about design and about the way things looked, and essentially they were people who just had too much money and needed somewhere to spend it. So they did, and we'll be going inside their house. All that remains of the medieval palace is some of the grounds, although I'm sure it looked very different, and the grand medieval hall, which we'll also see as we tour around the building. So get ready, and we're going to step out into the car park and go through the grounds to the entrance of Eltham Palace as soon as the bus stops. That was Eltham Palace. Hope you enjoyed that. We're going to progress our way to somewhere even more unusual than Eltham Palace, which is Sevendrew Castle. On the way, I just remembered someone else famous that lived in Eltham, which is Kate Bush. Kate Bush lived around here on the right, and she made her first live appearance at a pub called the Rose of Lee, which is on the Lee High Road. It's not called the Rose of Lee anymore, it's called the Dirty South, and it's just been refurbished. So should you ever feel the need for a drink in a spot where Kate Bush has been, that's where to go. Just on our right here is the Royal Blackheath Golf Club. That's there with the stone walls. That's the entrance. Interestingly, Blackheath is one of the very first places in the country where golf was played, although it was called Goff then. It's certainly one of the places where golf was first played, and Royal Blackheath Golf Club was one of the first golf associations that was established outside Scotland, and that was in 1756. Write that down, fact hoarders. Blackheath has got lots of sporting connections, as it happens. It gave its name to the first hockey club, which was during the 19th century, and it was also the home in the century before that of Greenwich Cricket Club, which played first class and also had first class cricket matches played there. And it was one of the 12 founding members of the Football Association in 1863. Nowadays, Blackheath and Greenwich Park are the starting point for the London Marathon, which has been starting there since 1981, and that's an exciting day for all of us at the end of April. Still going on today, there's a lot of kite flying on the heath, and that's been happening for hundreds of years. If you get stuck at these lights, ladies and gentlemen, you can talk about that McDonald's that's opposite. The first McDonald's in the UK opened nearby in Woolwich, in Power Street in Woolwich, in November 1974. and that was the start of their invasion. You can see we're going through a bit of a quiet patch on our way to Sevendrew Castle. I'm going to give you a break from the sound of my voice again now, and once again, if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask, crack on and I'll try and answer them as best as I can. So we're going to be turning back on to Shooters Hill again and then make our way up nearly to the top, where if you look ahead you should be able to see the water towers. It's a Gothic water tower built by the Victorians, and you can see it from all over the borough, in fact all over this area of southeast London. The other thing I wanted to say about Shooters Hill was just to comment on its role during the Second World War, when it was the site of an array of anti-aircraft gunnery which protected London as well as it could. It was also part of what was called the London Stop Line Central, which was a last line of defence from a German land invasion, which current thinking assumed would probably use the A2 as a guide from the southeast coast up towards the capital. So we're just about to turn onto the narrow road that runs up to Sevendrew Castle, and this is the start of a set of medieval woodlands. Oxley's Woods is the main part of it, although the castle is in a kind of offshoot of the woods called Castlewood. These woods have been here for as long as anyone can remember, which is a long time. They've been threatened many times with urban development and with transport links. Even as recently as about 10 or 15 years ago, there was a plan to put a road through the woods, which I think, as we go into them, you'll see would have been an utter disaster. We're going to be stopping up here any moment now and walking the short distance towards Sevendrew Castle. If it's the spring, which it is when I record this, keep your eye out for bluebells as we reach the castle. There's lots of bluebells in Oxley's Woods, and they're pretty. Right, everybody out. We're going to walk up towards Sevendrew Castle, which is an 18th century folly, which was built by a grieving wife for her husband. For many years it was used for different purposes and then really just let go, and was almost falling down until 10 or 15 years ago when people who loved it began renovating it. It reopened to the public a few years ago, and now you can go inside. There's a little tea room, and you can go all the way to the top. You can see 8 counties from the top of Sevendrew Castle, and that's the honest truth. Right, as we reach the main road again, and as we turn left, just look through the windscreen, you'll see one of the best views in London coming out in front of you, and it won't be in front of us for very long. We'll be going down the hill and you'll lose it, but keep your eyes open, keep your eyes front, and you won't regret it. Here we go. There you are. I mean, that really is splendid, isn't it? I like that word, splendid. That's a splendid vista. It's a fantastic view, and there's not many like that in the London area. We're back at Royal Herbert Pavilions now, the military hospital I talked about earlier. Queen Victoria visited here in 1900 when she visited soldiers who'd been injured in the Boer War, and soldiers who'd been injured in the First and Second World War were also cared for here. So it's had a useful life all the time it's been in existence. One other thing, which is going to be, it's kind of minority, niche interest this is, but the TV cook Fanny Craddock and her husband Johnny, from the days of black and white telly, they lived in Shoots Hill Road, which is where we are now, and Frankie Howard was gently educated at Shooters Hill Grammar School, he said, as was Jules Holland, who was expelled from the school, allegedly for damaging a teacher's Triumph Herald, although I don't remember that in his autobiography. I'm going to give you a break from the sound of my voice again now for the few minutes that it takes for us to get back to Blackheath. And once again, if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask, crack on and I'll try and answer them as best as I can. Okay, here we come on the way back to Blackheath. As I said earlier, home to lots of rebellions, encampments, and even one battle. The only battle actually fought on Blackheath was known as the Battle of Blackheath Field and took place in 1497. And it was another rebellion, much like the Peasants' Revolt. But this time it was Cornishmen who were angry at their taxation. Nothing much changes, does it? So we're going to be going into Greenwich Park any moment now. Greenwich Park is one of the oldest royal parks in London. It's the oldest enclosed royal park, and it was established by Henry VIII when he was on the throne as essentially as a closed-in hunting ground for deer. There's still deer in Greenwich Park. They have their own enclosure now, and it would be nice to think that they were the descendants of some of the deer that Henry VIII put there all those years ago. But to be fair, they're probably not. Greenwich Park these days is popular with Londoners and visitors from all over the world, mostly because it has the Royal Observatory in the centre of the park looking out across the river. In the Royal Observatory is the Meridian line. The Meridian marks the meeting point of the eastern and western hemispheres. So if you go inside the Royal Observatory, you can stand with a foot on either side of the world and feel as if you are the most powerful person in the universe, if you wish. Here we are, we're coming up to the park gates. They're going to come up on our right. This big wall is the wall that keeps the deer in. They're over there on the other side. Trying to keep away from humans, no doubt. I've been asked to tell you that these gates that we're going through were actually moved for the London 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games and made bigger for the sporting trucks to go through. It's not a very interesting fact, but it's worth telling. As we come up, we're going to come up to the point of the hill here. Greenwich Park, until 1857, it was the site of one of London's largest fairs, which pulled in about 200,000 people at their peak. They came from all over London, and the main attraction was tumbling. People would join hands and charge down the hill, which we're going to stand at the top of, next to the Royal Observatory. And it tended to end in quite unpleasant injuries, and the reasoning behind tumbling wasn't very pleasant either. It's so that women's undergarments would fly in the air, which is a most unusual sight in Victorian times. Here we come up to the statue of General Wolfe. General Wolfe was the victor of Quebec in a long ago battle for Canada, and this statue of Wolfe was given to Greenwich by Canada in the 1930s. If you look carefully as we approach the back, you'll see some marks on the white plinth, and those are shrapnel marks from a bomb that dropped here, or several bombs, during the Second World War. When we get out of the bus, you're going to see one of the mightiest views in London. You can see across the city, across the river, right through into the West End. If it's a clear day, you'll be able to see the London Eye and the BT Tower, the Shard for sure. Keep looking and see how many London landmarks you can see. St Paul's Cathedral is there, but it's difficult to spot if you don't know where to look, and if you don't, I'll show you. As we leave the park now, it's worth, I should have pointed out at the top of the hill, but who wants to interrupt the view? During the Second World War, again, there's a lot of Second World War stories in this tour, aren't there? Too many. But all of that area down below us, in front of the Queen's House, the green area, was dug up for allotments during the war, and they stayed in use until at least the late 1940s, and produced vegetables and fruit for the local people and for the economy. That area was also where the stadium was for the equestrian events in the London 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games, which was an event that a minority of people thought would damage the park for good. And as you can see, it clearly hasn't. And in fact, it was back looking better than it had before, really, within a year or so of the Games taking place. This is your last chance to ask questions, and I'd be happy to answer them. General Wolfe, whose statue we just saw, lived in this house on our right-hand side as a child. There's an interesting fact for you. And one thing that we missed, that I missed talking about on the way up the hill, is Cecil Day-Lewis's house. The poet laureate Cecil Day-Lewis lived in a house at the bottom of the hill, which we're going to pass any moment. And Daniel Day-Lewis, the actor, his son, grew up in this house. As we come to a stop, straight ahead of us you'll see St Alfred's Church. This is really the kind of spiritual heart of Greenwich. There's been a church on that site for over 1,000 years. They celebrated their millennium in 2012. It seems like a good place to stop. Thanks for coming on this tour. I've enjoyed my time with you. I hope you've enjoyed the time in our luxury minibus and enjoyed everything that you've seen. Have a great day. If you've got any questions about how to get where you're going, then ask me and I'll try and help you out.